Some women build careers, Victoria said, raising her wine glass at the family dinner table. Others just marry them. She looked directly at me, her smile sharp as broken glass. The entire table erupted in polite laughter. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. I felt heat crawl up my neck as 12 pairs of eyes flickered between Victoria and me. She wasn't finished. She leaned forward slightly, that perfectly practiced smile still plastered on her face, and added with deliberate emphasis, "Isn't that right, Claire?" The laughter grew louder. I set down my fork carefully, forcing my face into a neutral expression. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. Not here. Not now. My name is Claire Hammond, and I was 34 years old. I had been married to Victoria's son, Daniel, for 6 years. We lived in Seattle, where Daniel worked as a corporate attorney at a prestigious firm. And me? Well, according to Victoria, I didn't do anything worth mentioning. I looked across the table at Daniel, silently begging him to say something. Anything. His eyes met mine for a brief second before he looked down at his plate, cutting into his steak with sudden intense focus. My heart sank. The conversation moved on around us, flowing back to safer topics like vacation plans and the upcoming charity gala. But the damage was done. Later that night, as we drove home in silence, I finally spoke. "You didn't say anything." Daniel sighed, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. "What was I supposed to say, Claire? You know how she is. It's easier to just let her make her jokes and move on." Those words hit me harder than Victoria's insult ever could. Easier for whom? Not for me. Not for the woman sitting beside him who had just been humiliated in front of his entire family. She wasn't joking, Daniel. She was being cruel. He pulled into our driveway and turned off the engine. My mother has strong opinions. That's just who she is. Getting defensive only makes things worse. I went to bed that night replaying his words over and over. It's easier to let her joke. As if my dignity was a small price to pay for family peace. As if I should be grateful he wasn't actively participating in the mockery. The next morning, I was in the kitchen making coffee when Victoria called. Daniel had already left for work, so I answered, expecting some kind of family coordination call. Instead, she cornered me with words that felt like a knife sliding between my ribs. "Claire, dear, I wanted to talk to you about last night." Her voice was honey-sweet, the kind that made my skin crawl. "I hope you didn't take my little comment the wrong way." Little comment. That's what she called public humiliation. "You should really be grateful," she continued before I could respond. "My son chose you. That's not something to take lightly. Chose. Not loved. Not fell for. Chose. Like I was a selection from a catalog. Like I should feel honored to have been picked." Over the following weeks, I started hearing things. Daniel's cousin mentioned at a coffee meetup that Victoria had been telling people I never wanted responsibility. Another family friend said Victoria had expressed concern about my lack of ambition, wondering aloud if I was holding Daniel back from his full potential. She said it all so sweetly, with that concerned tone that made it sound like she was worried about me rather than tearing me down. The most disturbing part was how effective it was. People nodded sympathetically when she spoke. They believed her narrative because she delivered it with such practiced care. I had become the family charity case in their eyes. The woman who married well and contributed nothing. What they didn't know, what Victoria had never bothered to learn, was that I had been working remotely for the past 4 years as an independent consultant for educational institutions. I specialized in administrative systems analysis, helping schools and universities identify inefficiencies and implement better organizational structures. I worked quietly from home, managing my own schedule, bringing in a steady income that covered all my personal expenses and then some. At the next family gathering, Victoria repeated her joke. We were at her house for Sunday brunch, surrounded by Daniel's siblings and their families. She was pouring mimosas when she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I just don't understand women who don't work. How do you fill your days?" She said it while looking at me, that same artificial smile on her face. This time, instead of looking away in embarrassment, I smiled back. A genuine, calm smile that seemed to confuse her. She had expected the same reaction as before, the downcast eyes and burning cheeks. But I had decided something important in the days since our last encounter. I was done giving her ammunition. My smile seemed to unsettle her. She blinked, recovered quickly, and turned the conversation elsewhere. But I had seen it, that brief flicker of uncertainty. She had wanted tears. She had gotten composure. That small shift meant everything to me. It was the first crack in her carefully constructed power dynamic. That night, I sat in my home office and did something I hadn't done in years. I made a list of everything I had quietly accomplished while Victoria was telling people I did nothing. In the past 4 years alone, I had completed consulting projects for 7 different educational institutions. I had identified budget waste totaling over $3 million across those organizations. I had developed new administrative frameworks that were still being used successfully. I had published 2 papers in educational administration journals under my maiden name. I had built a professional reputation in a specialized field that most people, including my husband's family, knew nothing about. None of it had ever counted in Victoria's eyes because she had never seen it. Because I worked from home, wore comfortable clothes, and didn't announce my accomplishments at family dinners, I was invisible. My worth was measured by visibility, not impact. And I had been invisible for far too long. I started making subtle changes. When Victoria called to coordinate family events, I stopped rearranging my work schedule to accommodate her preferences. When she asked me to pick up her dry cleaning because I was home anyway, I politely declined, citing work commitments. When Daniel asked me to handle something for his mother, I suggested he do it himself. The family started experiencing small friction points for the first time. Victoria's birthday gift wasn't purchased and wrapped by me. The family newsletter she expected me to compile didn't get sent out. The coordination of the annual family photo shoot fell apart because I wasn't there to send reminder texts and manage the schedule. Nothing catastrophic, just the removal of invisible labor that no one had acknowledged I was doing. Daniel noticed. "You're being difficult," he said one evening after his mother complained that I hadn't confirmed the catering for an upcoming event. "I'm being unavailable," I corrected. "There's a difference. I have work commitments too." At a dinner party 2 months later, Victoria escalated. She was talking to a group of Daniel's colleagues and their wives when I walked by with a tray of appetizers I had prepared. "Some people just aren't ambitious," she said, her voice pitched to Carrie. "They're content to coast." She glanced at me, deliberately. Everyone in the group fell silent, the awkwardness thick enough to cut. One of Daniel's colleagues, a woman named Helen who ran her own consulting firm, looked uncomfortable. But no one challenged Victoria. That was her power. She could say cruel things in a pleasant tone and make other people too uncomfortable to call her out. I set down the tray and smiled at the group. "If you'll excuse me, I have some work to finish upstairs." Victoria's eyebrow arched. "Work? On a Saturday night? Some of us work weekends," I said pleasantly, and walked away before she could respond. Behind me, I heard Helen ask what kind of work I did. I didn't stay to hear Victoria's answer. What Victoria worshipped more than anything was the institution she had helped build. For 32 years, she had been involved with Lakewood Academy, a prestigious private school in North Seattle. She had started as a volunteer coordinator, worked her way onto the board of trustees, and eventually became the director of advancement, a position she held for 15 years before retiring 3 years ago. The school was her legacy, her identity, her crown. She spoke about it constantly, dropped its name in conversations, and made sure everyone knew she was the reason for its success. When alumni donated millions for a new science wing, Victoria took credit for cultivating those relationships. When the school ranked nationally, Victoria cited the programs she had implemented. The institution validated her existence in a way nothing else did. It was her proof that she mattered, that her life had substance and impact. And she never let anyone forget it, especially not me, the daughter-in-law who apparently contributed nothing to the world. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon in October. I was reviewing budget reports for a community college in Spokane when my phone rang with an unfamiliar Seattle number. "Ms. Monroe." The voice was professional, crisp. I had kept my maiden name for professional work, something Daniel's family didn't know. "This is Claire Monroe. My name is Patricia Wells. I'm the interim head of school at Lakewood Academy. Your name was referred to us by the consulting network as someone who specializes in administrative systems analysis and organizational accountability." My coffee went cold in my hand as she continued. We're conducting a comprehensive operational review following some concerns raised by our accreditation board. We need someone external, objective, and discreet. The position would be confidential until the review is complete. Would you be available to discuss this further? I stared at my computer screen, my mind racing. Lakewood Academy, Victoria's institution, her legacy, her pride. I should have said no. I should have cited conflict of interest and recommended a colleague. Instead, I heard myself say, yes, I'm available. The contract negotiations happened quickly. Patricia Wells met me at a coffee shop downtown, far from the school. She was in her late 50s, with sharp eyes and an air of exhaustion that told me the situation was worse than she was letting on. I'll be direct, Ms. Monroe. The board has concerns about operational decisions made over the past decade. We need someone to examine our administrative structure, financial oversight, and accountability measures. The review must be thorough, objective, and completely confidential. She slid a folder across the table. No one outside the board can know who you are or what you're doing until we're ready to present findings. That includes staff, donors, and former board members. Former board members. That would include Victoria. I understand, I said, opening the folder. The scope was extensive. Budget analysis, policy review, decision-making documentation, conflict of interest investigations. This wasn't a routine audit. This was an institution protecting itself. Why the secrecy? I asked. Patricia's jaw tightened. Because some of the people we need to examine still have significant influence. We can't afford interference. I understood perfectly, and I signed the contract that afternoon. 2 weeks into the project, Victoria delivered her favorite line at a family dinner. We were celebrating Daniel's brother's promotion, and the conversation had turned to career advancement and professional achievement. Victoria was holding court, as always, when she said with a laugh, I just don't understand women who don't work. What do they do with themselves all day? She was standing directly next to me when she said it. Daniel was across the room, deep in conversation with his father. No one came to my defense. I smiled and sipped my wine, thinking about the 70-page preliminary report sitting on my laptop at home. The report that detailed financial irregularities, policy violations, and accountability failures spanning a decade. The report with Victoria's name appearing in the documentation over and over again. I imagine they stay quite busy, I said pleasantly. Victoria laughed, completely missing the irony. If she only knew what I was busy doing. But she wouldn't know. Not yet. Not until it was far too late to stop what was already in motion. The first major discovery came in late November. I was reviewing board meeting minutes from 8 years prior when I noticed a pattern. Decisions about vendor contracts had been fast-tracked without the standard competitive bidding process. The reason given was always the same: time sensitivity and existing relationships. I cross-referenced the vendor names with publicly available business records. 3 of them had family connections to board members serving at the time. One was owned by Victoria's brother-in-law. The contracts weren't illegal, but they violated the school's own procurement policies. Policies that existed specifically to prevent conflicts of interest and ensure responsible use of donor funds. I documented everything with meticulous care, noting dates, amounts, and the board members who had voted to approve each contract. Then I went deeper. The vendor owned by Victoria's brother-in-law had been paid nearly $2 million over 6 years for facility maintenance services. I requested comparative bids from the same period. His prices were consistently 30% higher than market rate. Someone had decided that family convenience was worth more than fiduciary responsibility. And Victoria's signature appeared on multiple approval documents. Her name kept surfacing, not in obviously criminal ways, but in patterns of carelessness, ego-driven decision-making, and a fundamental disregard for the accountability measures that should have governed her actions. Scholarship funds had been redirected without proper authorization. Donor restrictions had been violated, with money designated for financial aid being used for facility upgrades instead. Board meetings had been held without required quorum, with decisions made by a small group that included Victoria. None of it was dramatically illegal. All of it was indefensible. The school had operated like Victoria's personal kingdom for years, with her making decisions based on what she thought was best rather than what policy required. And because she was Victoria, because she commanded respect and loyalty, no one had challenged her. Until now, I compiled everything into a preliminary findings report and sent it to Patricia Wells with a note: "We need to go deeper. This is just the surface." Her response came within an hour: "Agreed. Keep digging." I found myself at an ethical crossroads. If I flagged these findings properly, following them to their logical conclusion, consequences would be inevitable. The board would have to act. Accountability would be required. Reputations would be damaged. Victoria's reputation specifically. But if I didn't flag them, if I softened my report or looked the other way, I would become complicit in the exact kind of negligence I had been hired to uncover. I thought about Daniel, about his family, about the explosion this would cause when the truth came out. Then I thought about all the donors who had trusted this institution with their money, all the families who had paid tuition believing it was being managed responsibly, all the students who deserved better than an institution run like a personal fiefdom. The choice was clear. I chose the truth. I expanded my investigation, requesting access to personnel files, donor correspondence, and financial records going back 12 years. Patricia Wells approved everything. The board was ready for answers, regardless of where those answers led. At Thanksgiving dinner, Victoria was at her peak. The entire family had gathered at her house, and she was in her element, directing conversations and ensuring everyone knew about her latest involvement with Lakewood Academy's Alumni Association. "The school would collapse without institutional memory," she declared while carving the turkey. "These new administrators have no idea what it takes to build something that lasts. They need people like me to remind them of the foundation." I caught Daniel's mother-in-law, Diane, rolling her eyes slightly. Even family members were getting tired of Victoria's self-importance. But no one challenged her. No one ever did. 32 years I gave to that place," Victoria continued. "They still call me for advice on major decisions. They know who really understands that institution." I noted the irony silently. They weren't calling her for advice. They had hired me to investigate her. But she would never suspect that the quiet daughter-in-law she dismissed as useless was currently dismantling her legacy, piece by documented piece. My marriage was fracturing. Daniel had begun to notice my distraction, my late nights working, my unwillingness to engage with his mother's commentary. "You're being resentful," he said one night after I had declined to attend yet another family event. "She's not that bad, Claire. You're letting small things build up into something bigger than they need to be." Small things. Public humiliation was a small thing. Years of dismissive comments were small things. The complete invalidation of my existence was a small thing. "Your mother has spent 6 years making me feel worthless," I said quietly. "And you've spent 6 years letting her do it because it's easier than confronting her." He looked genuinely shocked. "That's not fair. I've never thought you were worthless, but you've never defended me either. And your silence told me everything I needed to know about where I rank in your priorities." We didn't speak for the rest of the night. I returned to my office and continued working on the report that would shatter his mother's world. And I didn't feel guilty anymore. In early December, I submitted my comprehensive findings to the Lakewood Academy board. The report was 93 pages long, meticulously documented, and unavoidable in its conclusions. Patricia Wells called me the day after the board reviewed it. Her voice was strained. "Ms. Monroe, your work is extraordinary and devastating. The board met in emergency session last night. Your findings are being described as unavoidable." She paused, and I could hear paper shuffling. "There will be consequences. Leadership accountability will be required. We're looking at policy violations, fiduciary negligence, and a systematic failure of oversight spanning more than a decade." I documented what I found. I said carefully, "The board will need to determine appropriate responses. They already are. We're scheduling a formal announcement for mid-January. There will be restructuring. Positions will be eliminated. Legacy relationships will be severed." Her meaning was clear. Victoria's reign was ending. "The board wants you present at the announcement," Patricia continued. "They want the professional who conducted this review to be available for questions. Will you agree to that?" I thought about Victoria's face when she realized what was happening. when she understood that her legacy was crumbling. Yes, I said. I'll be there. Not everyone on the board accepted the findings. Quietly, 2 members, both longtime allies of Victoria, pushed back hard. They argued that the violations were technical, that intentions mattered more than documentation, that destroying reputations over policy minutiae was excessive. I was invited to a closed board meeting to respond to their concerns. I brought my documentation, my analysis, and my professional reputation. For 90 minutes, I calmly walked them through every finding. I showed them the money trail, the violated policies, the pattern of decisions that prioritize convenience over accountability. When one board member suggested that Victoria had acted in good faith, I responded with a question. If a teacher violated school policy repeatedly, claiming good intentions, would you accept that excuse? Or would you hold them accountable for following the rules that govern their position? The room went silent. Leadership accountability can't be selective, I continued. Either we have standards that apply to everyone, or we have suggestions that apply to no one. You hired me to determine which one this institution practices. My report gives you that answer. The pushback stopped. They knew I was right. They just didn't want to face what that meant. The turning point came during the board's final vote on recommended actions. Patricia Wells called me afterward, her voice carrying a mix of relief and dread. The board voted to accept your recommendations in full. There will be an announcement at the annual Donor Recognition Gala in January. Leadership restructuring, policy reforms, and a public commitment to accountability. She paused. This will not be received well by certain members of the community. I know, I said. Ms. Monroe, I need to ask you directly. Are you prepared for the fallout? This will become public. Your name will be attached to findings that will end careers. I thought about Victoria's smirk at every family dinner, about Daniel's refusal to defend me, about years of being invisible while doing work that actually mattered. I'm prepared, I said. Then please plan to attend the gala on January 18th. The board wants you present when the announcement is made. I marked the date in my calendar. The same gala where Victoria would be expecting recognition for her decades of service. The same event where her world would come crashing down. Victoria threw herself a pre-gala dinner party at her house, inviting family and close friends to celebrate what she assumed would be a triumphant evening. I was expected to attend, and I did, watching her hold court about her legacy with a satisfaction that made my skin crawl. 32 years of dedicated service, she said, raising a glass of champagne. The school wouldn't be what it is today without the foundation I helped build. Tomorrow night, they'll finally give that foundation the recognition it deserves. She looked directly at me while saying, One day, Claire, you'll understand what real work looks like, what it means to build something that outlasts you. I smiled politely and said nothing. Across the table, Daniel's sister caught my eye with a sympathetic expression that told me she had heard all of Victoria's speeches too many times to count. But no one challenged her. No one ever did. Tomorrow night, I thought. Tomorrow night, everything changes. And I took a small sip of my champagne, savoring the irony that Victoria had no idea what was coming. The invitations to the gala had gone out months earlier, long before I was hired to conduct the review. Victoria had received hers with great fanfare, assuming it was an invitation to her recognition. I had received mine as well, sent to my professional email address with a note from Patricia Wells. Please attend as our guest. Your presence is requested. Daniel assumed I was attending as his +1, there to support him while his mother received whatever honor the school was planning. I didn't correct him. Let him think what he wanted. Let them all think what they wanted. The truth would reveal itself soon enough. The morning of the gala, Victoria called Daniel to coordinate arrival times and table assignments. I heard his side of the conversation from the bedroom where I was getting ready. Mom wants to make sure we're seated at the head table, he called to me. She thinks they're doing a tribute or something. That's nice, I said, zipping up the black dress I had chosen specifically for tonight. Professional. Elegant. Unmistakably serious. You seem calm, Daniel observed when I emerged. Shouldn't you be more excited? This is a big deal for Mom. I'm sure it will be memorable, I said. And it would be. Just not in the way any of them expected. Victoria had prepared remarks. I knew this because Daniel mentioned it in the car on the way to the gala. She stayed up late last night working on her speech, he said, navigating through Seattle traffic. She wants it to be perfect. I stared out the window at the city lights, wondering what she had written. What gratitude she had planned to express. What legacy she thought she was cementing. All of it was about to become irrelevant. We arrived at the hotel where the gala was being held, a beautiful ballroom with crystal chandeliers and round tables draped in white linens. Donors and alumni filled the room, their jewelry glittering under the lights. Victoria was already there, holding court near the silent auction tables, accepting compliments and air kisses from admirers. She saw Daniel and me arrive and waved us over with an expression of pure satisfaction. "Isn't this wonderful?" she said, gesturing at the crowd. "This is what legacy looks like, Claire. This is what happens when you dedicate your life to something meaningful." "It's certainly something," I agreed. And then I excused myself to find my actual seat, which was not at the head table, but at a table near the front reserved for board members and special guests. An hour into the event, I noticed the atmosphere beginning to shift. Executives were whispering in corners. Patricia Wells looked tense, her smile not quite reaching her eyes as she made her way through the room. The head table, where Victoria sat with Daniel and other family members, was animated with conversation. Victoria was laughing, confident, oblivious. Then I saw Patricia glance at her phone and nod to someone across the room. The signal. It was time. The lights dimmed slightly, and Patricia stepped up to the podium. The room quieted, conversations trailing off as everyone turned their attention to the front. "Good evening, and thank you all for being here tonight," Patricia began. "This annual gala celebrates the people who make Lakewood Academy exceptional. Tonight, however, we have some important announcements to share regarding the future of our institution." Victoria sat up straighter, her expression shifting to one of pleased anticipation. She thought this was her moment. Patricia continued, her voice steady. "The Board of Trustees has completed a comprehensive operational review to ensure our institution maintains the highest standards of accountability and transparency." "This review," Patricia said, her voice carrying across the now silent ballroom, examined administrative decisions, financial oversight, and policy compliance over the past 12 years. The findings revealed significant concerns that the board takes very seriously. I saw Victoria's smile falter slightly. Confusion flickered across her face. This wasn't how tribute started. "As a result," Patricia continued, "the board has voted to implement immediate leadership restructuring. Several positions have been eliminated, and policies have been reformed to prevent future violations of our fiduciary responsibilities." The room was completely still now. No one was eating. No one was drinking. Every eye was fixed on Patricia Wells. "Specifically, we are severing all consulting and advisory relationships with former board members whose decision-making contributed to the documented policy failures. This includes the elimination of the Director Emeritus position and all associated privileges." Victoria's face went pale. The Director Emeritus position was hers. It was the honorary role she had held since retirement, the title that kept her connected to the institution she loved. Patricia kept speaking, but I watched Victoria instead. Watched the realization dawn slowly, horribly, as the applause that had been building for her recognition died before it could begin. No one clapped. The silence after Patricia's announcement was suffocating. Victoria sat frozen at the head table, her champagne glass halfway to her lips, her face drained of color. Around her, people shifted uncomfortably, not knowing where to look or what to say. Daniel was staring at the podium with an expression of complete shock. His father had gone rigid in his chair. Patricia Wells continued with the clinical precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment many times. "The board wants to assure our community that these decisions were made after thorough investigation and careful deliberation. Our commitment is to the institution's integrity, and that sometimes requires difficult accountability measures." She paused, letting the weight of that statement settle over the room. "We are grateful for the professional expertise that guided this review. The findings were comprehensive, objective, and undeniable." Victoria's hands were shaking now. She set down her glass carefully, as if afraid she might drop it. She understood now. This wasn't a celebration. This was an execution. And it was happening in front of everyone who had ever admired her. "To ensure transparency," Patricia said, I'd like to introduce the professional who conducted this review. Ms. Claire Monroe is an independent consultant specializing in educational administration and organizational accountability. Her work has helped us identify critical areas for improvement and reform. The spotlight shifted, found me at my table near the front. I stood slowly, feeling 300 pairs of eyes turn toward me. Feeling Victoria's stare burn into the side of my face. Patricia gestured for me to join her at the podium. I walked up the steps with my head high, my hands steady, my professional credentials preceding me. Not as Daniel's wife, not as Victoria's daughter-in-law, as the architect of the investigation that had just destroyed her legacy. Ms. Monroe, Patricia said, turning to me with genuine respect in her voice. Thank you for your exceptional work on behalf of Lakewood Academy. I nodded, accepting the acknowledgement. Then I turned to face the room. Faced Victoria sitting at the head table, her expression frozen somewhere between shock and horror. Faced Daniel, whose mouth had fallen open in disbelief. Faced the entire room full of people who had never thought to ask what I did for a living. The moment Victoria's eyes met mine, I saw it. The exact second she understood. Not anger first. Not outrage or indignation. Fear. Pure, unfiltered fear. Because she finally realized that the daughter-in-law she had dismissed as worthless for 6 years had just professionally dismantled everything she held sacred. And had done it with the kind of meticulous competence Victoria claimed didn't exist in women like me. Her hand went to her throat, a gesture of unconscious distress. Her carefully applied makeup couldn't hide how pale she had become. Around her, people were whispering. Word was spreading through the tables like wildfire. That's his wife. That's Victoria's daughter-in-law. She did the investigation. Daniel turned to look at his mother, then back at me, his face a mask of confusion and dawning comprehension. Patricia Wells was still speaking, thanking me for my professionalism, but I wasn't listening anymore. I was watching Victoria crumble in real time, watching her legacy collapse under the weight of her own arrogance. All those years of mocking me for not having a career. And this was my career. This was what real work looked like. After the formal remarks concluded, after the polite applause and the resumption of uncomfortable conversations, Victoria stood abruptly and left the ballroom. Daniel followed her. I stayed at my table, accepting quiet congratulations from board members and fielding questions about the review process with professional composure. 20 minutes later, Daniel found me near the silent auction tables. His face was flushed, his eyes wide with something between shock and betrayal. "You did this," he whispered urgently, pulling me aside into a quieter corner. "You destroyed my mother." I met his gaze steadily. "I did my job, Daniel. I conducted an objective review and documented what I found. The board made their own decisions based on that evidence." "You knew," he said, his voice rising slightly. "You knew this would happen, and you didn't tell me. You didn't warn her. I was hired under confidentiality agreements. I couldn't tell anyone, and even if I could have..." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Your mother spent years violating policies and making decisions that damaged this institution. Someone had to hold her accountable. She certainly wasn't going to do it herself." "She's your mother-in-law," Daniel hissed, glancing around to make sure no one could hear us. "You're supposed to be on her side. Your family." I felt something cold settle in my chest. After everything, after 6 years of humiliation and dismissal, he still expected my loyalty to flow in one direction. Toward Victoria, never toward myself. "I was on the side of the truth," I said quietly. "That's all I've ever been on." "This will destroy her," he said, and there was real pain in his voice. "Everything she worked for, everything she built, you just took it away from her in front of 300 people. "No," I corrected, my voice harder now. "I stopped protecting her from the consequences of her own actions. There's a significant difference." He stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. And maybe he was. Maybe for the first time in our marriage, he was actually seeing me instead of a quiet, accommodating woman he had assumed I was. "I can't believe you did this," he said finally. "I can't believe you would be this vindictive. I should have been hurt by that accusation. Instead, I just felt tired. I wasn't vindictive. I was professional. If you can't see the difference, that tells me everything I need to know." Victoria cornered me in the hallway outside the ballroom an hour later. Her makeup was smudged. Mascara tracked down her cheeks in dark lines. Her hands were shaking as she grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging into my skin. "You destroyed me," she said, her voice raw with emotion. "You did this deliberately. You wanted to hurt me." I carefully removed her hand from my arm, maintaining my composure even as my heart pounded. "No, Victoria. I stopped protecting you. That's all I did." "Protecting me?" She laughed, a broken sound that echoed in the empty hallway. "You took away everything I had. My position, my reputation, my legacy. How is that protection? You violated policies for over a decade," I said calmly. "You made decisions that benefited you and your family at the expense of an institution that trusted you. You treated donor money like your personal fund and board oversight like a suggestion. I didn't destroy you. You destroyed yourself. I just documented it." She flinched as if I had slapped her. "I gave 32 years to that school. 32 years of my life. And you spent a significant portion of those years treating it like your kingdom instead of your responsibility. That's why you're here now." "Please," Victoria said, and the word came out broken. Desperate. "Please, Claire. You can fix this. You can talk to the board. Explain that there were extenuating circumstances, that I didn't understand the policies. You can soften your report." I stared at her, this woman who had spent 6 years telling me I was worthless, who had mocked me at every family dinner, who had whispered to others that I had no ambition, no value, no purpose beyond marrying her son. Now she was begging me to save her. "No," I said quietly. "You made choices, Victoria. You have to live with the consequences." "I'll lose everything," she whispered. "My connections, my standing in the community. People will think I'm a fraud. People will think you violated policies you were supposed to uphold. Because that's what happened. And you did it repeatedly, arrogantly, assuming no one would ever question you." She was crying openly now, her shoulders shaking. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for how I treated you. I see that now. I was wrong. Please, Claire. Please help me." The apology I had wanted for 6 years. Finally spoken. But far, far too late. I left Victoria in that hallway and returned to the ballroom. The gala was winding down, guests departing with uncomfortable expressions and whispered conversations. News of what had happened would spread through Seattle's private school community within hours. I knew that. So did Victoria. The drive home was silent. Daniel didn't speak to me, and I didn't try to force conversation. When we arrived at our house, he went straight to the bedroom and closed the door. I sat in my home office, staring at the files that had consumed my past 3 months. The evidence, the documentation, the truth. My phone buzzed with messages, some from board members thanking me for my professionalism, some from colleagues congratulating me on landing such a significant project, and one from Patricia Wells. "The board stands behind you completely. Thank you for your integrity." Over the next week, family members started choosing sides. Daniel's sister called to say she had always thought Victoria was too controlling. His brother texted to say I had embarrassed the family. Cousins, aunts, uncles. Everyone had an opinion about what I had done. Some blamed me for destroying Victoria. Others admitted, quietly, that they had always known she operated outside normal boundaries but were too afraid to say anything. 10 days after the gala, Daniel and I had the conversation I had been dreading. He sat across from me at our kitchen table, his coffee untouched between us, and said, "I don't know if I can forgive you for this. I had known this was coming, had felt it in the silence, in the way he couldn't look at me, in the space growing wider between us every day. You need to decide who you stand beside," I said quietly. "Your mother, who spent years making me feel worthless while violating her professional responsibilities, or me, who finally refused to be silent about either of those things." "It's not that simple," he said. "She's my mother, and I'm your wife, the woman you promised to honor and protect. But you've spent 6 years choosing her comfort over my dignity. So yes, Daniel, it is that simple." He looked at me with something like recognition finally dawning in his eyes. "You've changed." "No," I corrected. "I've stopped pretending to be smaller than I am. That's not change. That's honesty." He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "I need time to think." Take all the time you need, I said. But understand this, I will never be silent again. Not for you. Not for your mother. Not for anyone. The invitations stopped coming. Victoria, who had once been the center of Seattle's private school social scene, found herself suddenly isolated. People who had fawned over her for decades were now distancing themselves, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. Her phone calls went unanswered. Her lunch invitations were declined with polite excuses that fooled no one. The social exile was swift and brutal. I knew because Daniel's sister told me. Her voice conflicted about whether to feel sympathy or satisfaction. Mom sits at home most days now, she said during a coffee meeting where she had asked to see me privately. She doesn't go out. She stopped volunteering for anything. It's like she's disappeared. That's what happens when your identity is built entirely on status, I said not unkindly. When the status disappears, so do you. Do you feel bad? She asked. About what happened to her? I thought about that question carefully. Did I feel bad that Victoria faced consequences? No. Did I feel bad that she was suffering? Complicated. I feel bad that it took this long, I said finally. I feel bad that no one held her accountable sooner. But I don't regret doing my job. 6 weeks after the gala, a letter arrived at my office. Victoria's handwriting on the envelope. I almost didn't open it. Almost threw it away without reading. But curiosity won. Inside was a single page, written in her precise script. Claire, I know you won't believe this, but I am truly sorry for how I treated you. I see now that I was cruel, dismissive, and arrogant. I built my entire identity around one institution and one role, and when I lost that, I lost myself. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I finally understand what you were trying to tell me in that hallway. You didn't destroy me. I destroyed myself. And you had the courage to document it when everyone else looked away. That took strength I never gave you credit for. I hope you and Daniel find peace, whatever form that takes. Victoria, I read it 3 times. Looking for manipulation, for a hidden agenda, for the usual Victoria tactics. But it seemed genuine. Painfully, devastatingly genuine. The apology I had wanted for so long. Arriving far too late to change anything. I folded the letter and put it in my desk drawer. An acknowledgement of growth, perhaps, but not a path to reconciliation. Some bridges, once burned, stay burned. I declined Victoria's attempts at reconciliation, not out of cruelty, but out of self-preservation. She called once, asking if we could meet for coffee. I said no, politely but firmly. She sent flowers on my birthday with a card that said, "I'm sorry for not seeing you sooner." I donated them to a nursing home. She tried reaching out through Daniel, asking if there was any way to repair our relationship. I told him the answer was no. Not angrily, just permanently, because I had learned something crucial through this entire experience. Forgiveness doesn't require a relationship. I could acknowledge her apology, recognize her growth, and still choose to keep her out of my life. The boundary wasn't punishment. It was protection. Daniel struggled with my decision. She's trying, Claire. Can't you see that? I can see it, I agreed. And I hope she continues growing. But that growth doesn't obligate me to let her back into my life. I spent 6 years being diminished. I'm not going back to that, not for anyone. He didn't understand. Maybe he never would. And that was okay. I was learning that not everyone had to understand my choices for those choices to be valid. My professional life flourished in ways I had never expected. The Lakewood Academy project became a case study in my field, referenced in educational administration circles as an example of thorough, objective institutional review. Other schools reached out, wanting similar assessments. My client list grew. My reputation expanded. And I did it all without fanfare, without announcing my achievements at family dinners, without needing validation from anyone who had once dismissed me. The work spoke for itself. I moved into a new office space, hired an assistant, and started publishing more research. People in my field knew my name now, not as Daniel's wife or Victoria's daughter-in-law, as Claire Monroe, the consultant who had successfully navigated one of Seattle's most politically sensitive institutional reviews with integrity intact. At a conference in Portland, a colleague mentioned the Lakewood case during a panel discussion. The professional who handled that review demonstrated exactly the kind of objective accountability our institutions desperately need. No compromise, no politics. Just truth and documentation. They were talking about me, and no one in that room was laughing or questioning whether I had a real career. Daniel and I separated in March, 4 months after the gala. It wasn't dramatic. There was no screaming, no throwing of belongings, no final explosive argument. We just reached a point where we both understood that our marriage had been built on a foundation that no longer existed. He needed a wife who would prioritize family harmony over personal dignity. I needed a partner who would stand beside me instead of asking me to make myself smaller. Those two needs were incompatible. We divided our assets fairly, sold the house, and went our separate ways with a sadness that felt more like relief. I moved into a condo downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. Unpacked my things into a space that was entirely mine. No family dinners to attend. No mother-in-law to appease. No husband asking me to accommodate cruelty for the sake of peace. Just me, my work, and the quiet satisfaction of a life lived on my own terms. Looking back, I could see how silence had looked like weakness for so long. How my quiet competence had been interpreted as lack of ambition. How my choice to work from home had been seen as not working at all. But silence had never been weakness. It had been patience. And when the moment came to speak, my voice carried the weight of truth that could not be dismissed. A year after the gala, I attended a different educational conference where Patricia Wells was speaking about institutional accountability. I sat in the audience, anonymous among hundreds of other professionals, and listened as she discussed the Lakewood case without naming names. Sometimes the hardest thing a board can do is look honestly at its own failures, she said from the podium. To acknowledge that people we respected, people we trusted, people we considered pillars of our community, made choices that violated the very principles they claimed to uphold. But that honesty, as painful as it is the only path to real integrity. After her presentation, we had coffee. She told me Victoria had sent the board a formal letter of apology, acknowledging her policy violations and expressing regret for putting personal convenience above institutional responsibility. She's different now, Patricia said. Humbled, quieter, maybe better for it. Maybe, I agreed. We talked about other projects, other schools, other challenges in educational administration. When we parted, she said, "You changed Lakewood Academy for the better." Never doubt that. I walked back to my hotel thinking about Victoria's comment at that family dinner so long ago. Some women build careers. Others just marry them. She had mocked me for not having a career. But when power finally spoke in that ballroom, when accountability finally came for her arrogance, it spoke in my voice. And that voice had been strong enough to topple a legacy built on sand, precise enough to document years of negligence, and clear enough to be heard by everyone who had once dismissed me as worthless. I had built my career quietly, competently, without announcement or acclaim. And when it mattered most, that career had done exactly what careers are supposed to do. It had made an impact, changed an institution, demanded accountability, insisted on truth. Victoria had spent 32 years being loud about her achievements. I had spent 6 years being quiet about mine. In the end, only one of those approaches had withstood professional scrutiny, and it wasn't hers.